First, I really want to say how absolutely gratified, pleased, tickled, whatever the term is, to be here with you, and how absolutely grateful. Because as a Palestinian, to have people assemble on our behalf to recognize means everything. If you've been to Palestine, the only thing they ask of you is when you go back, tell them of our story. So I am always incredibly humbled by people's efforts and goodwill. And so thank you for joining us on such a beautiful day in the midst of Buccaneer weekend. You've had to sacrifice. Thank you so much. Okay. So what I'd like to do in starting is also to support the land acknowledgement that we just went through. And I think Vancouver Island is a very special place. In fact, it's such a special place that more olive oil, or Zatoun olive oil anyway, is sold on Vancouver Island than the rest of the province. How is that? Right? But that is the case and has been the case, forever, basically. And I think there's this great affinity. There's a great affinity with Vancouver Island and also with Canada out of our, colonial experience. And so I'd like to acknowledge that for Palestinians, their land has never been ceded either. Palestine is unceded territory. Just as we appreciate what that means, Palestine has been unceded. It has been given, sold, bought, brokered, promised, stolen, but never surrendered by its indigenous people. And one can say that whole concept of treatying with a colonial power makes no sense. It's almost as bad as you trying to negotiate a loan with the Royal Bank of Canada. or your license agreement with Apple or Facebook. What an absurd concept. Anyway, the other thing that draws us together, I think, is a strong sense of being stewards of the land. Palestinians have cared for their land and made it productive for centuries. They revere the olive tree as islanders do their cedars and fir trees, and they have fought to preserve them. For Palestinians, the olive tree carries the memory of Palestine, and that is why they grieve so deeply when it is uprooted or cut down. And for that exact same reason, Israel continues to destroy olive trees, to extinguish the memory. My name is Robert Massoud. I am a Palestinian Canadian born in Jerusalem. I am from a Christian family. I am also a citizen of Israel. And that is because my parents, as teenagers, did not leave their town in 1948 during the Nakba, which is also in Arabic called the catastrophe. But it wasn't, an act of God, and it wasn't a natural disaster. It was a man-made Zionist disaster, one could say. So the name itself doesn't really, fully explain where it is. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to point you to a couple of brochures that are out there. One is this, and it's about the Nakba, which, by the way, will be 70 years next week on May the 15th, which is the Tuesday. And this little pamphlet has, just very briefly, some facts and some myths about the Nakba with some excellent websites and films to view, documentaries on the Nakba. And I can't emphasize enough how important the Nakba is. Of course, Israel-Palestine is history over 100 years, but that is the core of the, not only the problem, but the solution. And the mauve sheet is actually 3 poems by 3 Palestinian poets of that period. They're called the Nakba generation, people who were alive in the time of the Nakba. They have all since died, all 3 of them. And while I'm at it, I'd like to also point out this sheet, this orange sheet. It basically represents my distillation of what's on the internet in terms of what the best documentaries, the best films, the best books, the best websites to go to, and the best sort of focused websites on both the Palestinian side and Israeli side. So please help yourselves to these. Because fundamentally what I do in my speaking ultimately can only be about connecting people and interesting people to the point where they self-educate. In speaking for 45 minutes or an hour, I mean, what can I really give? I can only connect you so that out of your own interest, you can self-educate. So in 2004, I started Zatoun, Fair Trade Olive Oil from Palestine. Zatoun is the Arabic word for olive, and Zatoun was created to bring Canadians and Americans a different view of Palestine, to bring a dimension of sense experience, of feeling, and of sharing, of realness. So I welcome opportunities to speak before supporters and customers, but also, of course, not essentially, but, you know, in speaking as we do here, there's an element of self-selecting. And you are speaking to people who are interested and have followed it, but you also want to bring in new people, right? I mean, that's, I guess, the difficulty of the left is, or, you know, people of conscience, is we're speaking to ourselves. But Zatoun, this is why Zatoun is so helpful, in that it's a tool. It's a very friendly, non-threatening gift that you can make to someone to just draw them in, because out of interest. So next time you make a salad or you're actually invited to someone's home, take a bottle of olive oil instead of a bottle of wine, just as a gift, with or without the brochure. For me, Zatoun has become my voice. It allows me to project my voice to people across the country, the United States, on the subject of Palestine. But it also enables customers and supporters to find their voice. It gives them something to hold on to as they speak to others about a topic, Israel-Palestine, that most people find difficult. They just tend to avoid it. So I'm thankful to Zatoun for bringing me here, and thankful to you for opening your hearts to what Zatoun has to offer. Zatoun is my only authority. I represent no one but myself and my views. I speak for no organization, no party, no government. I speak of my experience of many years working with thousands of people. Before I go further, I want to ask, who here has been to present-day Israel as it is configured? Yeah, so it's, looks like 12, 15 people or so, out of, looks like maybe 70 people in total. And who has been to the West Bank, the occupied Palestinian territories? So it's about half that number. Yeah, and, in a Canadian, American audience, typically it's the minority. And again, most people have gone to Israel and have not seen Palestine. Who here feels well-informed about Israel-Palestine? Yes, again, smatterings of people. I don't blame you. It's okay. It's very hard to be well-informed. I feel the same way. Every day, I find out 10, 12 new things. It's just incredible. And people say, oh, Palestine, it's complicated. That's kind of the line. It's not complicated. There's just a lot to know. That's our number one challenge. There's just a lot to know. The number two challenge is what exactly should you retain? Because there's so much misinformation, you actually have to weed through it. It's like a garden. Most of it is weeds. And you got to, just weed through it. So next time somebody says it's complicated, just say, no, you just got to need to know a lot. So let's get started. So for today, I want to connect two very critical and related realities. One is injustice in Israel-Palestine, and the other is the absolute crisis in the health and the continuation of this planet. I think these two are just not connected enough. I don't think they're separate realities, and they need to be connected. And it came to me because, especially among young people, they have turned their attention to the environment, to the ecology, and that has become where their voice is. And what I really wanted to do was say, no, yes, absolutely, that's a reality, but you also have to connect it to social justice and political justice. Because you can't, we're not going to save the planet on its own. If you looked at this month's issue of Common Ground, it talks about protecting the planet with what was it? Solar energy. Nothing will save this planet as a kind of single shot. It has to exist within a framework, and that's what I'll be talking about today. Not just kind of solar power isn't going to do it, wind power isn't going to do it, electric cars aren't going to do it, because they just can't on their own. So I want to make the following statement of fact. The planet we call home is in trouble. Human survival depends on strong and determined global action by governments across the world. States act according to international law and work within governing structures. Both of these have been lamed, almost mortally wounded by 70 years of Israel's intransigence and impunity towards Palestinians and occupation of their land. And all of this in open violation of international law and governing structures. I also want to make a statement of opinion. This is my opinion. The only way to save human life on this planet is to rescue international law and global governance from impotence and irrelevance. And the best place to begin is a true and just peace in Israel-Palestine. I'm not saying it's a guarantee. I'm just saying it's the best place to begin. Insisting on applying international law and ending to coddling and protecting Israel's actions will bring back leadership and moral authority to set a healthy agenda for the planet. That, in a nutshell, is my talk. But like everything else about Israel-Palestine, it requires a huge effort to set the stage, a preamble, and then another preamble. But at least I think learning comes from the pre-talk. So the pre-talk for me is this. So my goal is not only to convince you of the connectedness of Israel-Palestine to the planet, but also to connect you with Palestine. And I can imagine that many people are already connected. But if you're not, I want to create a connection. And if you are connected, I want to deepen that connection. Because I truly believe that connection is where everything human begins. Think of Port Hardy. If you don't know somebody from there, you've never been that far north, it's just a name. But the first time you meet someone who says, I'm from Port Hardy, or you pass by it, you have a different relationship. You start paying attention. And that's all Palestinians have ever asked for. Pay attention to us. Pay attention to our situation. Educate yourself. So, my goal then is, as I said, is when you hear the word Palestine or Israel or Zionism, your mind will go to today's talk and you will just listen differently. Listen with your heart and mind, tuned to the reality shared today. My family immigrated to Canada when I was a young child. For the longest time, I felt I had been colonized by Zionism. What do I mean by colonized? I mean accepting and living with internalized Zionist assumptions, logic, and myths, such as civilized, humane, democratic, moral army, light unto the world, Israel only defends itself, etc. Not to mention the biblical pronouncements of chosen and promised. I lived these in my bones, in my mind, making it almost impossible to stand up and to speak against Israel. Although much can be said about being colonized, it boils down most essentially to feeling inferior, but more importantly, I think, is not worthy of justice or dignity. Your claim to these does not rate, so why bother? I can only say that I am on the road to being decolonized, and I recognize it's a very long road. And of course we know that living in this country with First Nations people of this land. It's an incredibly long road, an incredibly difficult road. And I think the road that our own people, our indigenous peoples of this land, is so much more complicated than Palestine. I think Palestinians will have no problem decolonizing and creating their own realities out of just 3 generations of being colonized, and not out of dozens of generations as our own indigenous have here. So what I'm saying is that as a Palestinian, I'm having these difficulties. I cannot imagine the challenge faced by non-Palestinians who have not suffered, not witnessed, but have most likely been indoctrinated and acculturated to the Zionist narrative for so long and so completely. You are colonized in that respect and in that area. So I honor your presence here today, and I want to say a deep thank you. I also want to acknowledge the incredible work of this congregation and Kairos and IJV. You are all owed a tremendous debt of gratitude. So please allow me to share with you my personal approach to this awful situation, but it is also awfully important to all of us. I will not catalog the untold number of violations, the injustices, the crimes, the brutalities of Zionism and Israel. I choose not to do this for a number of reasons. First, there's thousands, if not millions, of examples to be found on the internet. You can find them for yourself. You don't need me. And that's why I've got the resource sheet I was mentioning. I also find it not useful to bombard you. After 5, 6, 7 examples, you get the picture. But then you also people become, their minds go blank, they become comatose, and they're overwhelmed. They shut down, they cannot absorb. It's also an assault on your heart, and it pains me. It literally pains me to do this to people. Have you ever noticed Palestinians are always apologizing? I apologize, I'm hurting you. I apologize, I'm conflicting you. I apologize, I'm imposing myself and my problems on you. Because people, in a way, don't want to know. They're afraid to know. I don't want to revel in victimization or victimhood, and I don't want to use guilt to manipulate people. I think using guilt is the most dishonorable thing to do. And also, in cataloging crimes endlessly, true communication is missing, real learning is limited, and the opportunity for critical perspective is lost. And I believe to simply shock people does not accomplish very much. The shock wears off and we go back to normal. And normal usually is ignoring. But we live in shocking times, especially. And we are aware of things thanks to information sources. But the more information, the more we become desensitized. And we shut down, and the learning just does not go in. So for these reasons, I rather choose to share with you only the big picture. The biggest picture I can think of. And it's the distillation of a lifetime of learning and sharing and thinking about this situation as an activist for Zatoun. And what I can bring you is perspective and context. At least that's what my intention to bring to you. And the best way to demonstrate this is to think of Google Maps. As much as we might hate Google and have problems with Google, there are some uses to Google. So like Google Maps, it gives you the flexibility to see at various levels. You can really zoom in at the level of the street, in neighborhood perhaps, and the road, and think of these as the crimes, the individual crimes and incidences everywhere. But when you see them on their own, how do you interpret them? How do you address them? How does it help you? It doesn't really until you can zoom up a little higher and see the neighborhood and how the roads connect and it's laid out. And that's when we begin to actually see, see our way through it. And then higher and higher and to the country, the state, whatever. But I would like us to go to the planet level. This is how high I want to go to that. So, and I want to do this, of course, because I think it's the most valuable thing I bring. Whenever I speak, it's like, what is the most valuable thing I can bring to this opportunity? And, of course, it's always evolving. So this is my most current thinking. And when you have perspective and overview, you can always find the street level for yourselves tomorrow. And that's part of self-education. So we come to the core of the talk, how a just peace in Israel-Palestine can save our planet. So by a show of hands, I think Wendy used the word ambitious. So how many of you think our topic is way too ambitious and is never going to happen? So it's too ambitious and it's just, yeah. Okay. How many people think that it's the reality, that it's actually valid and this is what we're talking about? These are the stakes. Okay, so yeah, so more than half people think that, this is really true. This is, the connection is true. How many people would consider the possibility that this title, is true? And that, yeah, about it. So we're kind of split. Yeah, we're kind of split. So, and what I want to also say before I get into fully is, I want to say that squarely and clearly, I want to put justice at the center of everything I'm about to say. The concept of justice is central. In some ways, I would think it is all there is of true value and meaning. And also, that it is not about over there, and it's not about them. It's about here, and it's about us. As people, as individuals, we usually can only focus on a narrow range of concerns and priorities. And the criteria we normally use is, how does it affect me? And that's fine, that's valid. There's nothing wrong with that. But we can't stop there. And normally most good people move on to the next, how does it affect others? And isn't that really the message of most religion, is do unto others as you have them do unto you? But given our current situations, even that's not enough. We need to move to a third level, a third criteria, and ask a third question, which is, how does it affect the planet? I think this is where we have come to. I sincerely believe that justice is to human affairs and human life as the balance of nature is to the life of the planet as a unified ecosystem. To borrow from the accepted notion of the balance of nature, justice is the balance of humanity. And the two operate on identical principles. Any violation to justice or to the balance of nature begins a slow, relentless, and insidious process, however subtle and benign, of destabilization followed by adaptation, leading to further destabilization until you have total collapse. And I truly believe we can see the planet approaching that point. But I think we can also see human life in the craziness that's happening in so many places. We're approaching that too. I mean, we're spinning out of control, both in the planet and in human life, as we see it in the actions of states and others. So, I would say if you are moved by the danger to life on this planet, then know it is tied inextricably to the absence of justice in human affairs. So if you wish to save this planet, seek to establish justice in human affairs. I believe it is not possible to treat them as separate and parallel realities. In the past, activists were content aiming for peace in the world. They would say, if you love justice, then seek peace in Israel-Palestine. I say, with the planet hanging in the balance, this changes to, if you love life, then seek justice in Israel-Palestine. They sound similar, but love justice becomes love life, and seek peace becomes seek justice. So if you take anything away from today, if you love life, seek justice, and seek it particularly in Israel-Palestine. So if we can move on to making the case for the title. Our planet is in trouble, or rather human life on the planet is in trouble. There's no controversy about that, I don't think. What is perhaps controversial is what's the cause and who's to blame, but we don't need to get into that. I mean, to me it's pretty obvious with melting ice caps and permafrost. We need to do everything we can to secure the physical planet. And number two, in the real and present danger of global warming, ecological degradation and shortages, and given the enormity of the challenge, only a global effort will succeed. Global means that each and every and all individual nations and states must be on board. There is no opt-out box. You can't just, I'm not in this. We're all in it. There's no opting out. Thirdly is the recognition that global action in the modern world is governments or state actors. Be they democracies, healthy or failed, dictatorships and despots, corrupt plutocracies, etc. They all need to be there. We can't exclude anybody because of their politics or their leadership. For better or worse, governments cooperate to various degrees through world bodies such as the United Nations and its agencies, be it education, welfare, culture, refugee, nuclear disarmament, and so on and so on. Anything that sabotages or diminishes the United Nations as a body renders it ineffective. Making the UN irrelevant is not helping the planet, and it's hurting urgent action and unity. The United States in the last 15, 20, even longer than that, has severely damaged the United Nations in practice and theory. It has kept the United Nations on a short leash, dependent, starved, and scared. Arguably, it has done this to benefit Israel, to its own detriment and standing in the world. Why would the United States do this? The present and unjust situation in Palestine has distorted and damaged the global agenda and the practice of foreign policy and the pursuit of justice everywhere in the world. And this is, to me, is pretty obvious when we look at foreign policy, not just of the United States, the European Union, and our glorious Middle Kingdom ourselves, the peaceable Kingdom Canada. Related to number 3, about the United Nations, governments or state actors operate on international law and conventions developed over 100 years. These laws, for better or worse, more or less regulate the interaction of states. They're not perfect by any stretch, but at least they're there, and they do regulate. Despite their failings and shortcomings, international law regulates what states can do and how they do it. And more importantly, what states cannot do. When international law is ignored, we do so at the peril of people, humankind, and the planet. Israel has made hypocrites and accomplices of the European Union, the United Nations, the United States, Canada, when we cannot act boldly or honestly in the world, when we turn a blind eye to Israel's misdeeds. Israel's actions have made a mockery of international and humanitarian law and the Geneva Conventions. And here we come to the punchline. To my mind, and I hope to yours, the situation in Israel-Palestine is the single greatest world divider. I like the word divider because it reminds me of decider, George Bush's decider. It's a good word. It's a divider. It divides the world. It is the massive boulder on the path. It is the giant sinkhole in the road, making progress impossible. However Israel may try to blame Palestine, Palestine is not the divider. It is Israel, by far, because of the two, it is by far the overwhelming power. Israel has the motive, the means, and the opportunity. Of course, Israel has not done this single-handedly. As mentioned before, it has to have willing accomplices among the high and mighty nations, be they willing democratic politicians, pliable dictators, corruptible governments, and powerful lobbies. And I'm just going to take a little brief detour to look at the story told by U.S. vetoes in the United Nations Security Council. The most powerful international body, at least in theory, the UN body charged with primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security. It's the only body that can pass binding resolutions and actions. And the U.S. is one of the 5 permanent members who can veto any resolution, recognizing that nothing that the General Assembly, nothing in the United Nations can actually get done without passing through the Security Council, and any one of those 5 can veto it. Basically just kill it there from moving forward and anything being done. The United States first used its veto in March 1970 over southern Rhodesia. The second U.S. veto came 2 years later to protect Israel from a resolution condemning it from an attack on its neighbors. Since then, the U.S. has cast a total of 43 vetoes, 43 of them, to shield Israel from Security Council resolutions. And since that time, the United States has vetoed more resolutions than all the other 4 permanent members combined. Fully 52% of all vetoes were cast by the United States, and of those, 55% were to shield Israel. And in each of those 43 vetoes that the United States cast, it was the only veto. It was the only condemnation of that resolution. Nobody else joined it. And so it was the sole vote against the resolution. Why would the United States do this? Why would the United States risk undermining its role in the United Nations? What has it gained? What has the world gained? So 28% of the vetoes in the last 48 years of the United Nations, arguably the only place where the world's problems can be solved, were made to shield Israel from compliance with international law, effectively giving it a blank check to breaking the law. So this brings me to the conclusion that peace in Israel-Palestine is our best hope. Not guaranteed, but it is our best hope. Once achieved, we can launch a process of rebuilding international law and the United Nations and all its bodies for the betterment of the planet. Without the United Nations acting in concert with nations of the world, there is no hope. There is no, single country, whether it's the United States, China, or Russia, that can go it alone. We are the margin of, kind of wiggle room in terms of saving this planet has gotten so small that it has to be a global effort. But, as you know, peace in Israel-Palestine is easier said than done. It has been the most consistent, non-stop talk of the world for 70 years. Peace in Israel-Palestine is the train that never arrives at the station. Why is this? We can put out many real reasons and make many, many more false excuses. But believe it or not, until now the stakes have not been high enough. International law, the United Nations could continue to be bankrupt, they could continue to be weakened, and we always had this thing of it's over there, it's not here. But both those things have actually evaporated. We have no choice anymore. And so I'm standing here today saying it's the only thing that it will work. It's the only thing that is worth doing. It's not to say when I say the only thing, I mean it's the thing that has the biggest payoff. Okay? And I'll explain that. It is the single greatest big win we can imagine. We're not talking about taking on Russia. We're not taking on China. We're just saying, no, Israel, we will not continue to protect you in the United Nations General Assembly or the Security Council. We will not continue to reward you with $4 billion annually. This is what the United States actually grants annually every year. And of course, this is peanuts. This is just the tip of the iceberg of what actually ends up in Israel and in various ways, and that's another topic. So, and we will not continue considering you our only friend and ally in the Middle East. Do you know how tired I am of Justin Trudeau saying that? I mean, he has failed this country. I mean, he's failed this country. He's failed the people. His four promises for getting elected: proportional representation, a new relationship with our indigenous people, right? The environment, and the fourth one was international relations. Canada is back, further back. It's brutal. It really hurts. So, what I'm saying is peace in Israel-Palestine is the ultimate test, the first step to a new lease on international relations and the United Nations. We are approaching a make or break moment. And as I said earlier, it's not a guarantee. It's just an excellent, low-cost beginning. So, we probably think our speaker is a nice guy. He's very sincere, very passionate, but really out to lunch. It's okay. It's all right. We can't have doubts. I mean, it's a huge undertaking in a huge area that we have like zero success. But what I want to say is it begins with imagination. Life begins with imagination. And I'm not, of course, thinking of Walt Disney or science fiction, but an imagination to visualize and to seek love and justice in a healthy human family. Recently, I came across an article, which always gives me a giggle when I think of it. And the title of the article was, "We can imagine the end of the earth before we can imagine the end of capitalism." Isn't that unbelievable? Yeah. So, and I don't want to enter into a discussion of capitalism, but I just want to point out that our world, our behavior, our survival begins with the imagination of something different and something better. So I propose a simple test. Let's take a few seconds just to imagine, and I'm sure everyone in this room can, how the world would be a healthier, saner, and more noble place if Israel-Palestine was truly resolved and the deception ended. Yeah? Like, we can all see it, right? We would turn a black hole that sucks in all the light into a radiant sun and an example to allow us to move forward. It's easy for me to see that, and I think many here can also, at least in their imagination, see that. So, I just want to say that, in my opinion, justice is all we have to save this planet. And as individuals and countries, of course, we have other pressures. Whether be they scarcity in healthcare and inequality of income and so on. But really, what's at the root of all of these, if not the lack of justice? That's really at the root of all these problems. So, if we are to get out of the mess we are in, it is be just and to do justice towards fellow and planet. So, let us use our justice as our guide to bring a just peace to Israel-Palestine and begin the journey to saving ourselves and future generations. If we cannot appeal for justice out of pure love for justice, then let's just do it out of pure self-interest. Pure self-interest, because we've come to that point. It's our best chance to survive. So even survivalists with canned goods in the basement and, a drawer full of guns, they can see this, I hope. That this is our future. This is the best chance we have of survival. So in all of this, we have Zatoun, a project that brings innocent, harmless, beautiful olive oil from Palestine to North America. What can it do? What it does only what it can do, and that is to plant peace in Palestine and plant it here in our midst. No peace will come to Palestine without a groundswell of support for peace from our countries, Canada and the United States, as we are the leaders and major contributors to non-peace and non-justice. Zatoun brings a modest human-scale ordinary substance, olive oil. It's something of the earth, something from antiquity, something of our shared experience. The olive tree and its many gifts have lived with us in our collective mythologies and ceremonies as symbols of the divine, of radiance, of light, warmth, and also, of course, peace. The word Messiah, or Christ, means the anointed one. So there's no overwhelming or overestimating the power and symbolism of the olive. And the olive tree represents the land of Palestine, as it is everywhere in the landscape. It also represents the character and the resilience of the people of Palestine. The olive tree has very deep roots. It is resistant to wind. It is resistant to fire, unless somebody really sets it on fire with gasoline. It is resistant to drought. It can grow in very, very stony ground. It really hangs in there. And that's, I think, what the Palestinians have done. And also, in bringing the olive oil is a symbol of it represents the livelihood that Palestinians have earned, have lived, and continue to live. So harvesting, bottling, and selling olive oil represents the challenges of gaining a livelihood under military occupation, when business and life, as we know it, is impossible. So I'm very conscious of time, and I'd like to, not say everything I want to say, but I will say a couple of things, and then we'll go into a poem. So what I am saying for tonight is we cannot afford to be afraid any longer. We've been afraid to speak out. We've been afraid to meet with each other and to share. Zatoun, I think, has made that easier, but we're still afraid. I'm afraid. Out of my own colonization, you could say. But we must advocate, we must agitate, we must demonstrate for a just peace in Israel-Palestine. Humankind depends on it, as does the planet. So, I'd like to conclude by reading an excerpt of a poem. The poem is from Maya Angelou, who I believe is the most iconic American poet of modern times. She died, I think, 2 years ago. She read this poem for the first time at the 50th anniversary of the United Nations in 1995. She must have believed that the UN was the place, the institution, that holds the best chance for survival of humankind on this tiny, beautiful planet. So the poem is entitled, A Brave and Startling Truth. We, this people, on a small and lonely planet, traveling through casual space, past aloof stars, across the way of indifferent suns, to a destination where all signs tell us it is possible and imperative that we learn a brave and startling truth. And when we come to it, to the day of peacemaking, when we release our fingers from fists of hostility and allow the pure air to cool our palms, we, this people, on this small and drifting planet, whose hands can strike with such abandon that in a twinkling life is sapped from the living. Yet those same hands can touch with such healing, irresistible tenderness that the haughty neck is happy to bow and the proud back is glad to bend. Out of such chaos, of such contradiction, we learn that we are neither devils nor divines. When we come to it, we, this people, on this wayward, floating body, created of this earth, have the power to fashion for this earth a climate where every man and every woman can live freely, without sanctimonious pity, without crippling fear. When we come to it, we must confess that we are the possible. We are the miraculous, the true wonder of this world. That is when, and only when, we come to it. Thank you, Maya Angelou, 23 years later, truer by the day. I want to suggest that the it of the poem is truth. It is justice, and it begins in Israel-Palestine. I believe that human life, in essence, is relatedness and connectedness. And today, I wanted to connect our future life on this planet with justice and peace in Israel-Palestine. I also wanted to create a connection for you with Palestine, so that when you hear of Palestine or Zionism or Israel, your mind will go to this talk and you will listen differently. Your heart will be more open to the Palestinians, and your mind also more critical of the Israeli viewpoint, which dominates in the media. Thank you very much.